Hey, amazing viewers, before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. A whisper in the darkness. The night air was thick with silence, an eerie stillness that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I stood in the dimly lit room, my hands trembling as they clutched a rosary. The air smelled of fresh flowers, roses and lilies, a scent that would normally bring comfort but now felt overwhelming, almost suffocating. The funeral was set for the next day. My granddaughter, Olivia, only 3 years old, lay inside the small white coffin in the next room. I still couldn't process it. It felt like a mistake, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. She had been a vibrant child, full of laughter and mischief. Her giggles used to echo through my house whenever she visited, her tiny arms wrapping around my neck as she whispered, "Grandma, I love you." Now she was gone, so suddenly, so inexplicably. My son, Timothy, had called me a few days ago to tell me Olivia had passed away from a sudden illness. There was no time to process it, no hospital visits, no chance to say goodbye. Just a phone call. "She's gone, Mom. We tried everything." That was all he had said before his voice cracked, and he hung up. Now, standing in his house, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Something wasn't right. I glanced at the coffin resting on the wooden table, adorned with white lace. My son had been strangely insistent that no one should open it. "She went through a lot, Mom," he had said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't place. "It's better if we remember her how she was." But how could I not see her one last time? How could I let my baby go without even saying goodbye? The house was unnaturally quiet. Timothy and his wife, Sarah, had gone to their room, leaving me alone with Olivia. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders as I stepped closer to the coffin. My fingers traced the edge of the wood, my heart pounding. And then, a sound. Faint, muffled. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. "Grandma." I froze. The rosary slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull clink. My breath caught in my throat. Had I imagined it? I leaned in, pressing my ear against the cold wood. The room was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. And then I heard it again. A weak, trembling voice. "Grandma, help me." A wave of ice shot through my veins. This wasn't possible. Olivia was dead. She had been in that coffin for over a day. This was grief playing tricks on my mind, my desperation weaving illusions. And yet, "Help me, please." My hands shook as I reached for the lid. My body was moving on instinct, a primal force driving me forward. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think logically, but my heart, my grandmother's heart, refused to listen. I gripped the lid with both hands. And I opened it. I will never forget what I saw. There inside the coffin was my granddaughter, alive. Her tiny face was streaked with dried tears, her lips trembling as she gasped for air. Her hands and feet were bound with chains. My stomach lurched. My head spun. "Grandma," she whimpered, her voice hoarse and weak. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The room swayed around me as my mind struggled to comprehend the horror in front of me. This was no illness. No tragic, natural death. This was something else, something unspeakable. I reached for her, my fingers working frantically to undo the chains. They were heavy, cold against her small wrists. Who had done this? Why had they done this? My mind raced as I lifted Olivia into my arms, cradling her against my chest. She was shivering, her tiny body pressed against mine. I could feel her heartbeat, faint but steady. Tears streamed down my face as I kissed the top of her head. Baby, Grandma's here. You're safe now." But deep down, I knew the truth. We were not safe. Not yet. And whoever had done this to Olivia, whoever had locked her in that coffin, intending for her never to wake again, they were still in this house. Shadows of deception. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. Olivia's tiny body trembled against me as I held her tightly, my hands still shaking from what I had just uncovered. The room around me spun, the air thick with the weight of an unspeakable truth. She was supposed to be dead. She was supposed to be gone. But she wasn't. She had been buried alive, trapped in a coffin, chained like a prisoner. Someone had wanted her to disappear forever. Someone had done this deliberately. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to push past the horror clawing at my mind. Who would do this? Why? I looked down at Olivia, brushing her damp curls from her face. Her big brown eyes stared up at me, filled with something that made my chest tighten, not just fear, but a deep, heartbreaking betrayal. She knew who had done this. Olivia, I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Baby, who did this to you? Her lips quivered. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she buried her face into my chest and sobbed, her little arms wrapping around me as though she was afraid I would disappear. A fresh wave of rage surged through me, hot and suffocating. Whoever had done this to her had stolen more than just her safety. They had stolen her voice, her trust. And I knew exactly where to start looking. Timothy and Sarah. I had ignored my instincts for too long. I had convinced myself that they were simply inexperienced parents, that their coldness towards Olivia was just a phase, that they would learn to love her as much as I did. But now I saw it. The distant ways Sarah spoke about her, the way Timothy dismissed her cries, the way Olivia's little body had become frail, how she devoured the snacks I brought her as if she hadn't eaten in days. I had made excuses. I had convinced myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But now, as I held my granddaughter, I knew the truth. They never wanted her. And they had tried to get rid of her. I had to move. I had to get out of this house. But I couldn't let them know I knew. I forced myself to stay calm, to steady my breath. My hands were shaking, but I gently laid Olivia back inside the coffin, carefully arranging the blankets around her. Her eyes widened in fear, and she grabbed onto my wrist, her tiny fingers desperate to hold on. No, Grandma, she whimpered. Don't leave me in here. Sha, baby, I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I promise I won't let anything happen to you, but we have to be very quiet, okay? We have to trick them. Her little head nodded, though tears still slipped down her cheeks. I gave her a reassuring smile, though inside I was falling apart. I had to keep it together. For her. I lowered the coffin lid, leaving just enough space for her to breathe. Then, I stood up and turned toward the door. My heart raced as I reached for the handle. I needed to find a way out of here. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, I heard the creak of a floorboard. I froze. A shadow flickered near the staircase. Timothy. He was standing there, his arms crossed over his chest, watching me. What are you doing, Mom? His voice was eerily calm, but his eyes held something else, something dark. I forced a tight smile. Just needed a moment alone with her. His gaze didn't waver. He knew. Or at least, he suspected something. My stomach twisted. I had to be careful. It's late, he said, tilting his head slightly. You should get some sleep. Sleep? As if I could rest knowing what I had just discovered. I forced a nod. You're right. I'll go to my room now. I turned toward the guest bedroom, my heart hammering in my chest. Timothy didn't move. He just stood there, watching, his presence sending ice down my spine. I stepped inside the bedroom and shut the door. My breathing was unsteady, my hands clenched into fists. I needed a plan. Fast. I couldn't just grab Olivia and run. Timothy would hear. I didn't know where he had hidden the keys to the house, and I couldn't risk the front door making noise. I needed to wait until they were both asleep. And then I would get Olivia out of here. The house was silent. I lay in bed listening, my ears strained for any movement, any sign that Timothy or Sarah were still awake. But after what felt like an eternity, the creaks and footsteps stopped. The house had finally settled into darkness. It was time. I slipped out of bed, my movements careful and precise. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Slowly, I turned the handle, stepping back into the hallway. The door to Timothy and Sarah's bedroom was closed. I moved swiftly, my steps light as I crept toward the room where Olivia was still hidden. My fingers trembled as I lifted the coffin lid once more. Her wide, frightened eyes met mine. "Sheh, sweetheart," I whispered, lifting her into my arms. She clung to me, her small body still weak. I wrapped a blanket around her and moved toward the back of the house. There had to be another way out. I reached the kitchen and spotted the back door. My fingers gripped the lock, twisting desperately. It was bolted shut. No. My panic spiked. I looked around for anything I could use, a key, a tool, anything. Then, I saw it. A small window above the sink. It was barely big enough, but if I could just squeeze Olivia through, I could climb out after her. I hurriedly reached for the latch and began pushing it open. And then, a voice behind me. "Going somewhere, Mom." I spun around. Timothy stood in the doorway, and in his hand, a knife. A mother's fury. My breath caught in my throat. Timothy stood in the dimly lit doorway, his face unreadable, his hand gripping the knife so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Behind me, Olivia whimpered, burying her face into my shoulder. I held her tighter, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. I had known my son all my life. I had raised him. I had wiped his tears when he was a child, kissed his scraped knees, held his hand when his father died. But I didn't recognize the man standing before me now. "What are you doing, Timothy?" I asked, my voice calm, though every fiber of my being screamed in terror. He took a slow step forward, the blade glinting under the kitchen light. "I should be asking you that, Mom." His voice was steady, too steady. "Cold. You were trying to take her." My stomach churned. He knew. I had no choice now. No more pretending. "You put her in that coffin," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You tried to bury your own daughter alive." He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. I did what had to be done. His words hit me like a slap. Had to be done. My voice rose, fury seeping into my every word. "She's a child, Timothy, your child." Something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not regret. Something worse. Disdain. "She was never supposed to be here." His words cut through me like ice. My grip on Olivia tightened. "You're a monster," I whispered, horror dawning on me in full force. "A soulless, disgusting monster." His jaw clenched. "No, I'm practical." He gestured toward Olivia with the knife. "She was a mistake from the beginning. Mom, you saw it, didn't you? Sarah and I never wanted a girl. We only kept her around until we had a son. And now," he shrugged, "we don't need her anymore." I could hardly breathe. "Need her?" My voice cracked. "She is not some toy you discard when you're bored, Timothy. She's your daughter. She was never anything to us." A fire roared inside me, burning hotter than anything I had ever felt in my life. My son, my own flesh and blood, was standing in front of me, telling me he had tried to erase his daughter from existence because she was unwanted, because she was a girl. I wanted to scream, to weep, to lash out at him with the same force of pain that he had inflicted upon Olivia. But I couldn't afford to lose control. I had to protect her. I had to get her out of here. I took a slow step back, my eyes darting toward the window behind me. If I could just buy myself a few seconds. "You're sick, Timothy," I spat. "You and Sarah both." He scoffed. "Sarah has nothing to do with this. This was my decision. My blood ran cold. She doesn't know. He smirked. She thinks Olivia died naturally. She thinks we did everything we could. She cried, of course. But deep down, she was relieved. Disgust rolled through me. He had fooled her, manipulated her into believing their daughter had been taken by fate, when in reality, he had taken her himself. I didn't even know who I was looking at anymore. You always wanted a son, Timothy, I said, my voice dangerously low. But I didn't raise you to be a murderer. His expression darkened. I told you, Mom. I did what had to be done. The knife gleamed in his hand. He was blocking the only door out. The only way was the window. I had to act fast. Without a second thought, I reached behind me, grabbing the first thing my fingers touched, an old cast-iron skillet on the kitchen counter. I moved before I could hesitate. With every ounce of strength in my body, I swung. The impact was sickening. The skillet collided with the side of Timothy's head with a deep thud, and he stumbled back, his knees buckling as the knife clattered to the floor. He groaned, gripping his head, his eyes filled with shock and pain. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I spun around, shoving the window open with a loud creak. "Hold on, baby," I whispered to Olivia, lifting her with both arms and pushing her through the small opening. "Go, Olivia," I urged as she wriggled through, her tiny hands reaching for the outside ledge. I heard Timothy growl behind me, the sound of him trying to push himself off the floor. I threw myself through the window. Just as my feet touched the ground outside, I heard a loud crash from inside. Timothy was back on his feet, and he was coming for us. I grabbed Olivia's hand and ran. My bare feet pounded against the grass as we sprinted toward the street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. No lights on, no people outside. I could hear Timothy behind us, his footsteps heavy and fast. "You can't run, Mom," he roared. "There's nowhere to go." But he was wrong. There was somewhere to go, and I was going to get Olivia there if it killed me. The moment I spotted a street lamp up ahead, my heart leaped. A main road. If I could just get there, someone would see us. Someone would help. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. "Grandma," Olivia sobbed, struggling to keep up. "Almost there, baby," I gasped. "Just a little more." I heard Timothy's footsteps getting closer. He was too fast. He was going to catch us. But then, headlights. A car was coming down the road. I turned, screamed for help, waving my arms wildly. The car slammed its brakes, skidding to a stop just as I reached the street. The driver's door flew open, and I felt pure relief flood through me as I saw who it was. A police officer. And not just any officer. Detective Lucas Warren, my late husband's best friend. His eyes flickered from my terrified face to Olivia, then to Timothy, who had frozen a few feet away. "Helen," he asked, voice sharp with alarm. "What's going on?" I sucked in a breath, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Arrest him," I choked out, pointing at my son. "He tried to kill his daughter." Lucas's face darkened. His hand went to his holster. "Timothy Sanders," he barked. "Get on the ground. Now." For the first time that night, I saw fear flash in my son's eyes. Because he knew. This was the end. And I would make sure he never got the chance to hurt Olivia again. A battle for justice. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion. My breath came in ragged gasps. My arms locked tightly around Olivia, who clung to me as though letting go would send her tumbling into the darkness. The glow of the street lamp above cast long, eerie shadows, stretching the figures before me into distorted shapes. Timothy stood frozen a few feet away, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes darting from me to Detective Lucas Warren. His hands, which had once held a knife meant to silence me, were now trembling. Lucas, my late husband's best friend, had his hand on his holster, his entire body tense with authority. His voice was sharp, commanding. "Timothy Sanders, step away from your mother and put your hands where I can see them." For a long moment, no one moved. Timothy's eyes locked onto mine. The mask of arrogance and control he had worn all these years had cracked. For the first time, I saw it. The raw, undeniable fear. "Mom, please." His voice shook. He took a slow step forward, hands raised slightly, trying to paint himself as the victim. Lucas took a step closer, cutting him off. I said, "Don't move." Timothy's jaw clenched. His eyes darted around as if searching for an escape route. "You don't understand." He tried again, his voice rising. "She's lying. Mom's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. Olivia, she." I felt Olivia flinch against me. Her tiny fingers curled into my sweater, her breath shallow against my chest. She was terrified of him. And yet, even after everything, even as I stood there holding the child he had tried to bury alive, he still thought he could talk his way out of this. "Not this time. You put her in a coffin, Timothy," I said, my voice steady now. His gaze snapped back to mine, his nostrils flaring. "No, You chained your own daughter and left her to die." I took a step forward, my fury outweighing my fear. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. You told me she was sick, that she was gone. But she wasn't, was she? She was screaming for help while you were planning her funeral." Lucas's face darkened. His grip on his gun tightened. "Helen," he said, his voice carefully measured, "is this true?" I turned to him, my chest heaving. "Look at her, Lucas." I shifted Olivia slightly so he could see her face. The bruises on her wrists, the fear in her eyes, the frailty of her little body. Lucas's expression hardened. His lips pressed into a thin line, and his gaze flicked back to Timothy. "Get on the ground. Now." His voice was laced with authority. Timothy panicked. No, you don't understand." He took a step back, shaking his head. "She's making it up. She." Lucas pulled his gun. "Last chance, Timothy." Timothy bolted. It happened so fast. 1 second, he was standing there, pleading his case. The next, he was running, toward the house, toward the darkness, toward freedom. But Lucas was faster. Bang! The gunshot cracked through the night, sending birds scattering from the trees. Timothy collapsed. He hit the pavement with a cry, clutching his leg. Blood began pooling beneath him, spreading like ink in the dim glow of the street lamp. Lucas approached, gun still trained on him, his expression unwavering. "Stay down," he ordered. Timothy groaned, his fingers clawing at the concrete. His body twisted as he looked up at me, his face contorted in rage. "You ruined everything," he spat, his voice venomous. A chill ran down my spine. Even now, even after everything, he still thought he was the victim. "No, Timothy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You did that to yourself." Sirens wailed in the distance, the red and blue lights reflecting off the pavement. It was over. The police took Timothy away. He was screaming by the time they cuffed him, his rage turning into a frenzy of denials, accusations, pathetic lies. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. I sat in the back of an ambulance with Olivia wrapped in a thick blanket, her tiny body tucked into mine. A paramedic examined her, murmuring soft reassurances. She was dehydrated, exhausted, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. Lucas knelt beside me, his face softening as he looked at Olivia. "She's safe now," he said quietly. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Thank you." He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You saved her, Helen." My eyes burned with unshed tears. "No," I whispered. "She saved herself. I just listened." Olivia stirred in my arms, her small voice muffled against my chest. "Grandma." I stroked her hair, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Yes, baby." She curled her fingers into my sleeve, holding on tight. "I love you." My heart shattered and healed in the same breath. I held her tighter, closing my eyes. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in this world. The dawn of a new life. The sky had begun to lighten, the first streaks of dawn stretching across the horizon like delicate brushstrokes. The world felt different now, lighter, somehow. As I sat in the sterile waiting room of the hospital, watching Olivia sleep in my lap, I realized I had been holding my breath for the past 3 years. And for the first time, I exhaled. After Timothy's arrest, everything unraveled quickly. The police uncovered evidence of Olivia's mistreatment inside the house, locks on the outside of her bedroom door, signs of malnutrition, bruises that should have never been there. Sarah was questioned separately. At first, she wept, swearing she had never known, that she had believed Timothy when he told her Olivia had been sick, that the doctors had done all they could. But then the autopsy report came back. There had never been an autopsy, because there had never been a death. Sarah nearly collapsed in the interrogation room. When she finally understood, when she realized what Timothy had done, she screamed. A raw, gut-wrenching sound of a mother breaking in two. I should have hated her. I should have blamed her. But in her grief, I saw something I hadn't expected. She had been blind, yes, but she had also been manipulated. And when the detectives asked if she wanted to testify against Timothy, she didn't hesitate. "I'll do anything to protect my daughter," she whispered. For the first time since Olivia was born, I believed her. It was over. Timothy was facing a lifetime in prison. Sarah, though broken, was undergoing intensive therapy, fighting to be the mother Olivia deserved. And me. I was right where I needed to be. A soft murmur pulled me from my thoughts. I looked down to find Olivia stirring in my lap, blinking up at me with sleepy brown eyes. For a brief moment, fear flickered in her gaze. A reflex, a scar that time had yet to heal. But then she saw me. Her fingers reached up, curling into the fabric of my sweater, as if checking to make sure I was still real. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice small. I smiled, running a hand through her tangled curls. "I'm here, baby." She blinked, as though processing the words. Then, slowly, her lips curved into something I hadn't seen in weeks. A smile. A real one. Warm. Hopeful. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her little voice uncertain. I felt something in my chest tighten. I thought about all the darkness she had endured, all the nights she had cried alone, all the times she had waited for someone to save her. And then I thought about the future. A future where she would never have to feel afraid again, where she would never be unwanted, where she would never be forgotten. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, closing my eyes as I whispered the only words that mattered. "Yes, baby, we're safe now." And for the first time, in a long, long time, she believed me. And that was the beginning of everything. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.